the 20th National Congress of the Chinese Communist Party begins. The party breaks its unwritten rule of a two-term chairmanship, and for the third time, this man is elected as General Secretary, Xi Jinping. This means that he can rule China up to even 2032, or even longer. This decision will make him the longest person to rule China since Mao. Who is the man who wields power over more than 1 billion people? How did he get into politics? What experiences shaped him? And what does he think about the world? We'll answer these and other questions in today's video. It's October 1st, 1949. Chinese Communist leader Mao Zedong proclaims the establishment of the People's Republic of China. A new period in Chinese history begins. It's a symbolic moment. The people who fought alongside Mao consolidate their power. A new elite is emerging that will rule this vast country. And among this elite is this man, Xi Jinping. He is a close collaborator of Mao and has been fighting for power alongside him since the 1930s. Without a doubt, he can be seen as one of the founders of Communist China. Xi Jinping's second wife was Qi Xin, an influential activist of the Chinese Communist Party. From this marriage, they had 4 children, including today's Chinese leader, Xi Jinping.
In general, Xi Jinping grew up in luxury. He went to an elite school where only the children of the top elite are allowed. This is the 101st Elementary School in Beijing. There he belonged to the elite. He had the best teachers, had the best food in the cafeteria, and other privileges.
After 1963, the Xi family situation changes. To understand this, we need to explain what was going on in China at the time. In 1958, Mao Zedong announces the Great Leap Forward campaign. China is to make a rapid transition directly to communism. However, the outcome of this strategy was not a great leap forward, but a great famine. A famine that claimed tens of millions of lives. As a result, in 1962, Mao Zedong was stripped of executive power. And this had already happened to Xi Jinping's father. He was demoted as a result of fractional fighting and accused of anti-party activities. He was subjected to so-called struggle sessions during which the enemy of the people was denounced. This photo is from one such session, and the person condemned is actually Xi Jinping's father.
These were meetings at the workplace, but during them you had to condemn others. Individual people had to step forward and condemn a particular party member. In this case, at these sessions, Xi Jinping and his siblings had to condemn their own father. Likewise, his wife had to condemn her husband. Here she reportedly did not object, but also did not speak out quite actively against her husband, which was later brought up against her, and she was punished during the Cultural Revolution.
Even greater upheavals begin soon after. In 1966, the so-called Cultural Revolution begins. In the simplest of terms, it can be described as a great movement launched by Mao, in which radical youth accused the Chinese government of the time of abandoning communist ideas and leading the country towards capitalism. People associated with the revolution wanted a return to Maoist policies. They also fought against any signs of the old order, and as a result of the Cultural Revolution, Mao Zedong was restored to power. However, for many, the Cultural Revolution meant repression. While Xi Jinping's family was among those repressed, their situation could have been much worse. Xi Jinping's father had already been removed from power and punished, so the worst wave of repression associated with the Cultural Revolution bypassed Xi's family.
Of course, the family still felt all the worst effects of the Cultural Revolution. The others had been punished before, so they were prepared to some extent for these repressions. And, of course, Xi's family still paid a rather high price.
Young Xi Jinping wanted to be part of the ongoing revolution, so he joined the so-called Red Guards. This was a radical communist movement that would lead the revolution. They were responsible for numerous crimes against the so-called enemies of the people. However, in 1967, Chairman Mao decided to crack down on the Red Guards, and a huge number of them were sent to work in the countryside. Among them were Xi Jinping and his family.
He escaped from this exile and was caught and sent again to the countryside, already in Shaanxi province, and there he actually spent several years living in quite difficult conditions. Of course, we have to remember that everyone was living in difficult conditions in China at the time. You can't say that his circumstances were much worse than those of many other people. This is where a family tragedy certainly cast a shadow. His older sister, his half-sister from his father's first marriage, Xi Heping, committed suicide. It is said that she committed suicide or that she was forced to do so, or something simply happened and she committed suicide. But it was because of the persecution that befell her and the family during the Cultural Revolution. This story is not entirely clear. The propaganda is officially silent on this, but the so-called whispered propaganda, the one that releases some information through unofficial channels, only says that his sister died and that this cast a deep shadow over Xi Jinping and his family. But we don't really know what the relationship between the siblings from the first and second marriages was, whether they were close or not. We don't know whether Xi Jinping actually experienced this very strongly. What we do know is that it looks good these days to say that a general secretary, especially one who seizes more and more power for himself, can say that his family was repressed during the Cultural Revolution. This is a psychological safety valve for many Chinese who tell themselves, well, Xi is tightening the screw, it's getting harder and harder, authoritarianism is making a comeback, but he won't go too far because, after all, he and his family suffered during the Cultural Revolution. I'm not sure this isn't exactly the kind of propaganda element whispered to appease the Chinese. But in fact, we know very little about this and have to rely on second and even third-hand sources, and we cannot be confident in the sources.
It is this period, the period of exile and work in the countryside, that is used by propaganda. And in places, it even seems like a hagiography. For example, the propaganda spreads the story of how Xi Jinping got a motorcycle for his work. Xi was said to have decided to sell it to buy tools for the entire village. Another story is about how he carried a 100-kilogram sack of rice on his back for 5 kilometers without switching shoulders.
In
fact, we don't know which of these stories are true. Some are more probable than others. We know that some are certainly made up, like the one of carrying the bag of rice for many kilometers. But we don't know and don't have the ability to separate truth from fiction.
It remains undisputable that the period of exile to the countryside was pivotal in the life of China's current leader.
Official or unofficial biographies or narratives say that it was a very difficult period for him, but he understood how good the party, order, fighting chaos, economic development, and preserving party rule is for the Chinese people. Then he understood that he had to become redder than the banner of the People's Republic of China, that he simply must devote himself heart and soul to the party, because the party knows what it's doing. It's hard to say how realistic this is, and it's hard to give in to all this kind of psychologization on the subject, but I think we're dealing with some kind of Stockholm syndrome here.
Xi Jinping had reportedly applied as many as 10 times to become a member of the Chinese Communist Party.
We know that in fact the children of those people who were repressed during the Cultural Revolution had difficulty in accessing the party, in joining the party. So probably he applied many times and was accepted only after some attempts. Whether it was actually the 10th time or whether there were fewer of these attempts, we don't really know. We can't be sure, and it's possible that this is also simply part of building some narrative about his personal history. Oh look, he only got into the party on the 10th attempt.
What then is behind Xi's determination to join the party, which after all led to an outright personal tragedy?
He came into contact with injustice, and because he was a fairly young person, he was a teenager when he ended up in the countryside, it caused him to begin to identify with the regime. Or he might be an example of a person who decided that if he can't beat them, he'll join them and become a boss. It's possible. It's also really hard to answer that, but it's a very interesting thread. I suspect, however, that, unfortunately, we will not resolve it.
When the Cultural Revolution ended, better times were to come for Xi Jinping. Still young, he decided to continue his education.
As the Cultural Revolution was coming to an end, Xi Jinping went to university in 1975. But, of course, he went to university without a high school diploma because he didn't have time to pass it. And then, having already completed his bachelor's degree in chemical engineering a few years later, he went on to do a doctorate in law. So it's a situation where he probably went to undergraduate studies without a high school diploma and then began a PhD without a master's degree, although we don't really know this for sure.
We often refer to the communist elite as the Chinese aristocracy. And as once in the aristocracy, the Chinese elite also arranged marriages. Xi Jinping's first marriage was this kind of marriage. His first wife was Kei Ling, the daughter of a Chinese diplomat and ambassador to the UK.
She was more interested in emigrating and settling in London. He was already starting his career in the party. They married in 1979 and she was preparing to climb the career ladder in the provinces. We can assume that at this point in the marriage he was already thinking of moving to the provinces and starting his career there. Because without an episode in the provinces on your CV, you cannot reach the heights in the Communist Party. They got divorced. She emigrated altogether and, from what I know, has been living in England. She's a private person, not involved in politics, while he went into politics.
Xi Jinping married again in 1987, this time to Peng Liang.
This too is probably an arranged marriage, only that it was probably arranged under different rules. When people are young and are from the top of the red aristocracy, then the families are directly involved in arranging the marriage, and these young people have less say, although they must also consent to the union. In the second marriage, as they are already older, it is more the acquaintances, friends or comrades in the party who arrange the meetings for them, and here they have more freedom, whether they make a better match with that person. This was a marriage that was very successful, in the sense that these are two very ambitious people who know what they want. She comes from a family of musicians, but works for the army and has the rank of general in a music band. She was also very popular in Chinese society, and for many years, people joked that it was Xi Jinping who is his wife's husband.
As a well-known singer, she performed on Chinese state television, including during the New Year. They are still married today and have one daughter.
We don't quite know what's going on with Xi's daughter. She studied at Harvard under an assumed name. Those who knew her then, classmates from her year or group, said she was a good student, always prepared. This was certainly not a case of a Communist Party brat who throws money left and right at parties. No, she actually studied hard. She did what she expected to do and then returned to China. When Xi Jinping became leader of the People's Republic of China, she made several statements that she would take care of her father's social media presence. I guess that didn't quite work out. Then she disappeared from the public eye and we don't quite know what's going on with her. We don't know if she's married or not, to whom, we don't even know where she is. A rumor has it that she supposedly returned to the United States and is living there under an assumed name. The Americans agreed to it on the grounds that she is not politically involved in any way. She is a private citizen, so why not? But this is just one of the rumors, one of the versions. We are not in a position to say if this is true or not.
Let's go back to Xi Jinping's political career. His father was rehabilitated in 1978 and held leadership positions in the Guangdong province. Thanks to his father's connections, Xi Jinping began his career in the prefecture of the Fujian province.
And in the Fujian province, he began to climb the career ladder. This is one of those two provinces opposite Taiwan. The other is Zhejiang. These are some of the richest, if not the richest provinces in China, and easy to govern. One can say even effortless. You really have to mess things up and make an effort to do so in order for things to go badly there. Xi Jinping was active in Fujian until 2002. Then he moves over to Zhejiang, where he governs until 2007.
In 2007, Xi Jinping takes power in Shanghai. By then, it is clear that he's being groomed to be the next General Secretary of the Chinese Communist Party. But his mother was also crucial in this process.
She likely has extensive connections in the ruling elite, or had them at that time. The fact that his father in 1985 directed Xi's career towards his richest provinces, where he could not only easily ascend and in relative safety, but also gain a very large political base, was also significant. Xi Jinping had a lot of resources which he could trade with others, barter for services, and notably expand his base.
Xi took great care not to be involved in any scandals.
Apparently, he told his family, "You can make money, I'll help you make it, but you can't make money in the province I'm working in at any given time." It was an exchange. He would put members of his family, his clan, to make money under the care of someone else from another province, and he in turn would take care of that family. This is the kind of cross-service exchange that secures people in high positions. Not everyone is sensible enough to work it out that way, and not everyone can find someone they can trust enough to put themselves under the care of their family, and do the same in return. It played out nicely for Xi Jinping, and it did not get him into any trouble. There is one well-known scandal from when he was in power, one that Xi was not involved in, but he cracked down hard on everyone who participated in it. The fact that he acted in a very decisive way and at the same time seemed indestructible, skillfully able to create a buffer between the family's business and himself, caused him to be considered sensible enough to be put in power.
In addition, Xi Jinping was not a member of any of the warring fractions and was therefore acceptable to all sides. As next in line to the Chinese throne, Xi Jinping had one rival, Bo Xilai. This politician, with the support of part of the extreme left, the oil industry, and the intelligence services, tried to undermine the way in which the successor was chosen, and thus Xi's future power. These attempts, which from the beginning had little chances of success, ended in a scandal. A scandal that could serve as a script for a thriller.
The scandal is interesting in itself because it gave us a glimpse of how party elites function. In October 2011, Neil Haywood, a British citizen, suddenly dies. The official investigation declared the case a suicide. He died in a hotel in China. Then, in the spring of 2012, Wang Lijun, that is, the police chief under Bo Xilai, fled to a neighboring province to the city of Chengdu, where there is an American consulate, and asked for asylum. It wasn't granted, and he was, after some time, removed from the premises, although after quite a long interrogation by the Americans, and he turned himself in to the police in China. He was brought to Beijing and interrogated there. It turned out that Haywood was murdered, poisoned by Bo Xilai's wife. What the motives were, we don't really know. The investigation theoretically showed that it was because Haywood had demanded more money for services to Bo's family. The services in question were moving capital and money that the family had accumulated. Once they were able to transfer capital abroad, Haywood invested it in foreign markets. He was sort of a banker for the Bo family. Most likely the motivation was therefore money. During the investigation, Gu said she thought he wanted more money because he was taking care of their son studying abroad in the UK, and she was afraid for her son's future and whether his life could be in danger. She thought that Haywood was blackmailing her in some way. But in my opinion, we don't have enough confirmed information to believe this explanation, and it's unlikely that someone would dare blackmail someone so high up in China. However, the very fact that Haywood was poisoned and quickly eliminated shows that it was the other way round, and that it was him who should have been afraid of the Bo family.
This case brought down Bo Xilai, who was later convicted of corruption. To this day, he remains in a prison called the Tiger's Cage.
The Tiger's Cage is the colloquial name for a prison in northern Beijing, in the northern suburbs of Beijing. It is a prison where only those in the party elite who have lost big money and influence are sent. Again, there is a rumor, which we have no way of confirming, that Bo Xilai's favorite pastime is calligraphy and slapping the guards in the face, a peculiar hobby. This also sort of shows the reality of China. A prisoner can slap a guard in the face because the prisoner is much higher in the hierarchy. Of course, the guard will not let him escape, but the prisoner is stronger.
It could also be the question of a campaign to destroy someone's character or reputation. The fact that we know this information, that it has been released to the public, is also a way of destroying the positive reputation of Bo Xilai that at least part of Chinese society still had. This too has to be weighed up in different ways.
Just before the party convention at which Xi was to take over, US Secretary of State Hillary Clinton flew to China. However, right before that meeting, Xi Jinping mysteriously disappeared.
The official version is that nothing happened. He was just busy dealing with something else. He was gone for 2 weeks. He actually disappeared. The unofficial version is that Xi Jinping, after the Bo Xilai scandal, decided that he had to have a very firm mandate from the party leadership to eradicate the evil that had taken root in the party. The leadership, the party elders, did not want to give him this mandate because they feared he would seize too much power for himself, which is in fact what happened. This unofficial version says that he then withdrew and said that, if you don't want to give me the power, then I don't have to govern. For me, the most important thing is action. If you give me the tools to act, then I will. If not, then I won't. Meaning that he wants to withdraw. At the time, of course, there was no one to replace him, especially after the Bo Xilai affair. The whole multi-level party jigsaw of dependencies and so on was in place, but without this key element at the top, it would have fallen apart. According to this story, the party elders relented and gave him a very broad mandate to act, which he actually used. This is one version. At the time, I remember another, a less popular version of this story, one less favorable to Xi Jinping. Apparently, there was a meeting of the Red Princeling aristocracy beforehand, and it was rumored that there was a very intense discussion about the division of spoils during this meeting. Every change of power means a new deal. Who milks what? That is, which party clan gets which cow to milk out China's huge economy. During this meeting, it's thought there was a serious discussion, even to the point of a fist fight, and someone threw a chair. The chair supposedly hit Xi Jinping on the shoulder. He bruised or strained his shoulder. He must have had it in a sling. And generally, Chinese leaders are not allowed to show that there is something wrong with their health. This is against Chinese political culture. The leader is always a specimen of health. He never gets sick, never has a runny nose, never has a fever, nothing. And it's because of this that he had to cancel all meetings until those 2 weeks passed, when his sling or cast could be taken off. This is one more version. In my opinion, the probability of both stories is similar.
Regardless of what happened just before the party congress, Xi Jinping took power and was given a strong mandate to exercise it.
He also had a very broad support base. He skillfully deployed his people in key places in the Central Committee of the CCP. And even though his people were in the minority, he controlled certain key moments and sensitive issues, critical to the way the Central Committee functioned, and so he was able to do a lot. He modeled himself a bit on Stalin, who said that it doesn't matter who votes how, it's important who counts the votes.
Xi also launched an anti-corruption campaign at the beginning of his rule. This is an action that virtually every new general secretary undertakes to consolidate his power and weaken his opponents.
Xi Jinping did the same, but he went much further. This anti-corruption campaign actually continues with less intensity to this day. And he's cleansing the party, not just the elite, not just the middle levels, but from the top down. Of course, those who are aligned with people who are sympathetic to Xi Jinping will not be affected. This is not an actual anti-corruption campaign to eliminate corruption. This kind of elimination of corruption serves the purpose of eliminating people who need to be got rid of. Detaining someone and accusing them of party corruption is the equivalent here of giving someone a fine for crossing on a green light. This is something normal and part of the system. Corruption is endemic in this regime. What the party has to do, and does from time to time, is to keep corruption at a certain level that is acceptable, so that it doesn't become dysfunctional for the regime. That's how it works there. Xi Jinping himself and some party members have suits that cost more than several months of their official salary.
Now let's turn to Xi Jinping's worldviews. The key thing to understand his view of the world is Marxism-Leninism.
He is really a deeply committed Marxist, but a Marxist-Leninist, with the stress on Leninism more than Marxism. This can be seen both in his speeches, which are much better constructed from the point of view of the Marxist narrative or ideology than his opponents. These are not speeches where he just has something to say about Marx, has to refer to Marxist ideology. You can see that this is a deeply thought-through issue. He genuinely refers to Marxist ideology, also to Stalinist ideology. It was under Xi Jinping that the remaining volumes of Stalin's works, which had not been published in the Soviet Union, were translated into Chinese, compiled and published, because the penultimate volume of Stalin's works had already been prepared for publication in the Soviet Union, but after Stalin's death it was not published. In China it was translated and published, and also the last, the final volume, which was translated from his works and compiled and published by the Chinese themselves.
Regarding Xi's approach to the West early in his reign, he said, "There are some well-fed foreigners who have nothing better to do than point fingers at our affairs."
He said this in Mexico to the Chinese diaspora, to representatives of the Chinese diaspora. It doesn't seem to be a coincidence. On the one hand, Mexico is a developing country, so it's as if he was counting on this to resonate well as an anti-Western element. But at the same time, he said it in a country bordering the United States. He probably wouldn't have had the courage or the desire to say it in the United States because it would have messed up his eventual visit there. But the fact that he said it very close to the United States, practically in America's backyard, that in itself is very symbolic and significant. In fact, we don't really know what kind of attitude he has towards foreigners. We actually know very little about his personal views. He was in the United States for a short visit for a few weeks in the 1980s in Iowa. At that time, he behaved very appropriately, made some friends, even spent some time with one of the families. And he maintains good relations with them to this day. But do they maintain these good relations because it's a good propaganda piece and it sells well PR-wise to the West? At the time when, for example, Xi Jinping had already become General Secretary, then Chairman of the Rural People's Republic, and was about to travel to the United States, he specifically wanted to stop in Iowa and visit this family. But whether this was actually his personal choice or whether it was simply a well-played narrative by the propaganda department or the Central Committee, who knows? Let's remember that Marxism in the Chinese edition is Third World Marxism. It is a Marxism adapted to the needs of states, or the nation, or the national liberation anti-colonial struggle. So it contains a very strong anti-colonial, anti-Western element. It's hard not to suspect that Xi Jinping, for whom party ideology has become his own psyche, it's hard to believe that he hasn't to some extent embraced it. But whether this is his personal bias or whether it's more of a bias on a general basis that the West is bad, but maybe some Westerners are okay, or whether it's more of an aversion to foreigners in general, this is hard for us to establish. Personally, I would rather lean towards the former theory, that it is simply an ideologically adopted dislike of the West and not necessarily a dislike of individual foreigners.
Xi Jinping's China is also more assertive on the international stage.
Whereas the question again is whether this is a matter of Xi Jinping himself or simply him tailoring his message to a specific audience. China has reached a certain level of development and international engagement where it simply has to decide, will it align itself and adapt to the existing international order, or try to more or less violently change it and adapt that order to itself? It seems that under Xi Jinping, the party has decided that it is resolutely working in the latter direction, i.e., it is trying to break and change the existing international order. This is what their alliance with Putin and with Russia is about. It is difficult to say which is the cause and which is the effect.
China under Xi is also gradually becoming more authoritarian.
Of course, at least as of today, thankfully there are no death pits, no mass repression, although these repressions do happen, as in Xinjiang. We have 1.5 million people, if not more, put through concentration camps, children taken from their parents, and in fact actions that meet the definition of genocide. Xi Jinping is not a good boy. He is not Winnie the Pooh. He really can be brutal and ruthless. Besides, the zero-COVID strategy has also shown how ruthless and brutal he can be in his actions if he deems it necessary. In general, there is no mass repression yet, except in Xinjiang, Tibet, on the periphery of the empire. There is certainly an increase in pressure for China's success to be shared by as many citizens as possible. Here it's hard to talk about the extent to which this is part of the ideology, whether the party works to make things better for the people, and to what extent the party needs to allow the people to make their lives better in order to legitimize its rule and protect its rule in this way. It's hard to decide which is more important in this case, but there is certainly a growing emphasis on prosperity for all. Propaganda in some departments places the emphasis on this. The question is how effective it all is.
In 2023, Xi Jinping was elected for another term. This means that he can rule until as long as 2032. This would make him the CCP's second longest-serving Secretary General, after Mao Zedong. So will he continue to rule until his own death?
Pytanie, ja bym odwrócił pytanie, czy będzie mógł nie rządzić do śmierci?
I would dismiss this question and ask whether it will be possible for him not to rule until he dies. The longer you rule, the more enemies you create. So leaving office and giving up power means putting yourself at the mercy of others. Although you can probably prepare a successor, nominate someone, but you never know for sure that this person won't turn against you, turn out to be an enemy, or lose power and be replaced by someone hostile to you. This is one thing, that is, to secure yourself. The other is the issue of alienation. The longer you rule, the more you alienate yourself, the more and more convinced you become of your wisdom, of your genius, that only you can advise, only you see all the problems, and only you see all the solutions. As a result, it may be that he simply won't let go, even if he initially took power with the assumption, and I'm making this up now, I'll rule more than 2 terms, it will be 3 or 4 terms. He may even have negotiated this kind of arrangement with the party elders when he was coming to power, that he will rule double the number of years, or 20 years, because the program he is supposed to carry out is more complicated and complex, and he will need more time to implement it. It's possible that this was the case, and it's possible that coming to power he really believed that he would, I don't know, govern for 3 or 4 terms, and then just leave. Nevertheless, I think that already, after so many years in power, this process of alienation, detachment from reality, and self-glorification is already taking place. Additionally, I think there are very few people in the world who could maintain a healthy distance from themselves in such a situation. So I suspect that he will simply at some point, if not already, sooner or later, reach the point where he will recognize that he simply cannot give up power, and personal security in the grand plan, the program he wants to carry out, no one else will be able to carry it out the way he does. He may justify it to himself this way, but this is already psychologizing. Maybe let's not get too deep into it.
Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, take a look at our other stories on screen now.